Hello, everyone. This is Jen for the next episode of FLYTcast. Here we are learning about cults, becoming literate in how they work, and learning how to protect ourselves and our loved ones. Today, I want to talk about what I call Stumpy Stories informally, or what is known more formally in the study of cult psychology as Phobia Induction. It's a method of control in which the cult or group induces a fear of something illogical into their subjects in order to create control. Now, examples could include, you're afraid of certain words. You're not supposed to say the name of, say a group leader or of a deity or words that are said in a secret ceremony. You're taught to be very scared if you ever say any of those things, and that you're going to get in trouble. And your nervous system gets riled up, and you feel with all these chemicals coursing through your body because of the fear you have based on the story that you were told, that uh, those feelings are some kind of spiritual experience and a warning from God telling you not to do this thing. I know that I experienced it in the cult that I grew up in. It was very against LGBT issues. The against same-sex marriage, against transition. And I can remember the first time I saw a trans person. I knew I saw a trans person. Secret, I actually was a trans person, but didn't know it. I was just really surprised. But I remember the first time I saw a trans person, I was terrified. I felt, these shakes. I felt, the kind of the blood drain from my face, not sure what I should say or do. I remember I was terrified of gay people because I had been taught that, they were attacking God's plan for the family, all those sorts of things. And all these stories that I had been told created this irrational fear within me. And when this phobia was activated, you have some of the same symptoms of a panic attack. Your heart starts beating faster. You have adrenaline run through your system, and those create physical sensations that are often misattributed to some sort of spiritual experience. If this is God warning you, or this is Satan attacking you, or whatever the equivalent in your group is. So why do I call these Stumpy Stories? Um, when I was a kid, about fourth or fifth grade, every year our school district would send the kids at about that age on a camp out, on like an overnight wilderness retreat. There were some cabins up like an hour and a half or 2 hours away, near a forest, and the kids would go and do activities and learn about nature, and do some science curriculum type stuff. And you'd sleep in the cabins overnight. You'd get back up, do some more activities, some competitions between the schools, and then you'd go home. Pretty cool. They called that Mallow Camp. Now, as you can imagine, a bunch of uh, 10, 11, 9, 10, 11-year-old kids in the biggest sleepover you can imagine, uh, they're going to have a hard time settling down at night. Kids are, up in the middle of the night, running around, hooting, hollering, throwing stuff at each other. And the counselors, the grown-ups who don't have quite that much energy packed into such a little package, they're exhausted, just like parenting, except for, you got 300 kids or whatever it is, and they wanted to sleep. And so one year, some counselor got the bright idea to tell a story about a monster that was going to get you if you ever got out of your cabin after dark. Told the story of Stumpy. Now, there's lots of variations on the story of Stumpy. I won't go in depth here. Um, but basically, the idea is, if he was an axe murderer. He had one arm. He was kind of like this feral man who lived in the woods. And if you ever came came out of your cabin after dark, or even if you made too much noise in your cabin after dark, he was going to come and get you. And for a lot of the kids, that that was good motivation to quiet down and stay in the cabin. Now, if you can see kind of the parallel, what I'm talking about here between the phobia induction in, say, a religion or a political cult, or what have you. You're supposed to be afraid of certain words. You're supposed to be afraid of certain people. You're supposed to be afraid of certain imagery. Supposed to be afraid of tarot cards or Ouija boards or whatever. This is the other. This is the thing that you've heard scary stories about how Satan is associated with it, or the equivalent. And so your system starts to panic when you see these images. It's a phobia. It's similar to arachnophobia, or similar to any of these phobias that engender an irrational nervous response. But these things can be created. Frankly, that's what PTSD is, and that's a whole discussion for another time. I believe that cults are largely based on trauma bonding, that you create PTSD as a glue that links a group together. But this is, just kind of one example of it, the Stumpy story. So going back to Stumpy, we've been told the story, and tell you what, kids were terrified, and there were different variations on the story. No one knows what the original version was, but it got more intense and more intense and more intense, to the point where it got banned in the camp because kids were just getting too scared, and understandably so. There was a girl in my year who, in one of the other cabins, the girls managed to persuade the counselor to tell them the story, and this girl literally threw up because she was so scared. I feel bad for her. But yeah, a scary story. And after you've heard that story, you listen really closely when you're laying in bed. You hear any sort of rustle, and believe me, there were a lot of rustling sounds, because since this was a kids' camp, all of the all of the mattresses were coated in plastic in case anybody had an accident, So anytime some kid rolls over, you hear this, and you think it's twigs snapping outside, and it's this one-armed axe murderer about to bust in. Now, some of the kids who didn't believe the stories thought it would be fun to sneak out, and they're running around and banging on windows and making sounds, and everybody's terrified all night that it's Stumpy. And there's no such thing. It was a story that was created as a control mechanism for the counselors to keep the kids where they wanted them. No reality to it, just creating fear for control. Now, in a situation like this, you could argue about whether that's ethical or not. And the nice thing about it is it's kind of limited in scope. It happens in one place once, and it doesn't control your life for the rest of your life afterward. There are other stories that are told the world over that are scary stories that are told, for instance, to children to protect them from going down to the water before they learn how to swim. There's stories like this all over the planet. There's kind of like a ghost zombie horse story in Ireland of, if you go down too close to the water, this zombie horse is going to grab you and take you away, and you're never going to see your family again, which isn't true. But tell you what, I've got a 6-year-old, and he's got a much higher estimation of his abilities than is probably warranted at the age. He's sure he's going to be able to climb wherever and not get hurt. He's sure he's really good at all this stuff physically, which is great that he has confidence. But as a parent, you do get concerned that he's going to overestimate his abilities, get in over his head, and hurt himself. And you can't convince him to say, okay, looking at this wall, if I climb it, I might fall, because he's like, no, I'm really good at climbing. So what a lot of parents have done through time, I don't do this with my son, but what a lot of parents have done through time is they make up an additional story. Again, the situations with going, you go too close to the water and a monster will get you. Those stories are all over the world, and that's because every kid in every culture across history has been curious about the water, before they were ready to deal with it. And so the parents, to convince them not to go there alone, would tell them there's something scary over there that's going to eat you. And that protects them until they get older. And then hopefully they learn that there's no such thing, but they still tell the story to their kids to protect them. Again, limited in scope for a limited purpose, and hopefully not lasting damage. Similarly, I remember one time as a kid, there was a babysitter who didn't want us to go into the crawl space. And she told my friend and I that there were man-eating rats in there. And we believed her. And so we just kind of like stared longingly into this cavern that looked like so much fun to explore, but knew that if we stepped a toe in there that we'd get eaten alive. And, it worked. We stayed out of there. Now, these are kind of goofy stories. They're folklore, they're myth. And, keeping kids from drowning, that's probably a good thing. But it becomes an issue when it starts to control your entire life, when you lose agency as an adult, when you're told to be afraid of entire groups of people. Say, you see someone of another religion and you should be terrified. Everyone outside of your group is deceived. You ever see, a person in a turban, or like a Sikh or a Muslim, thinking that they're possessed by the devil, those sorts of things. People have phobia induction over race, over hearing language differences. You hear people get really upset when someone, say, in the service industry is speaking a different language. When you go to, say, Taco Bell or something, and they've got an immigrant worker who's struggling to speak English, people get really upset because they've been induced to be afraid of immigrants, phobia induction. So it's so important to look at whatever groups you may be involved with, and at your own behavior. I try to work on this as well, and say, okay, what are the things that I'm afraid of, and are there stories that I've been told? What can I investigate to determine whether or not these sorts of fears are rational or irrational? And this all ties into as well. There's a principle of control described in Lifton's model, which I'll hopefully get to in a future episode. He calls it mystical manipulation. This is this idea that certain events or coincidences are used to infer supernatural power. So he calls it mystical manipulation. I call it misattribution of phenomena. So, it's manipulation, for instance, say if, you're using smoke and mirrors and intentionally making a fake appearance of a miracle, right? Or planned coincidence, those sorts of things, finding out information about a person beforehand and then giving it to them as if you've received it from a supernatural source later on. That's mystical manipulation. But where I disagree with Lifton is I don't think that covers it all. I think most of the time when people are using manipulation this way, they don't intend to. They're fooled as well. So rather than mystical manipulation, I like to call it misattributed phenomena. So again, this phobia induction idea, if you're told a scary story and you believe it, and then you tell your kids this scary story, they're still going to be terrified of Stumpy, even though there's no such thing. They're gonna feel all of the same sensations of fear in their body. If if you tell them, I like to use the example of left-handed people just because it's kind of a neutral idea. If you tell them that left-handed people are bad and from Satan, and then they see someone opening a pickle jar with their left hand, all of a sudden they're going to notice that, and fear is going to course through their body. And if you tell them that left-handedness means that that person's from Satan, then they're going to interpret those feelings in their body as an attack from Satan. And that's going to really throw the way that they interact with other people in the world. That's kind of a weird example, but the real examples aren't that much weirder. So again, phobia induction, which is, often happens by Stumpy Stories, as I described. It's a form of mystical manipulation as Lifton calls them, or as I call them, uh, misattributed phenomena. Now, that was kind of all circling around one principle. You can call it whatever you like, but just kind of the idea is using fear to control, and in particular, creating programmed irrational responses in the nervous system that throw you off the rails, that keep you away from doing specific things, but also keep you so afraid that you want to band together with the group and not explore outward. So this has been FLYTcast episode 3, I think it is, 2 or 3. It'll say in the title. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it and found some helpful information. If you have any additional thoughts, please add them in the comments, either here on YouTube or on the Facebook page. And any questions or suggestions for future episodes, I would much appreciate. Thanks for taking the time to listen. Bye.